On that, I heard you say that you regretted the interview you did with Harry.
Yeah, I didn't regret the interview. I really enjoyed the interview. I thought we had a great conversation. What I regretted was that I'd agreed against my own gut feelings to the publishers or the organizers' demand that it be put behind a paywall. So people had to buy a copy of Harry's book and to watch. And I thought, this isn't fair because 4 million people already had. Why should they not be able to watch this conversation? And Harry and I both felt afterwards that this would be a gift to the world. But the lawyer said that if it was released, it would be subject to a class action suit because it had been marketed
as something that was exclusive to those
so I thought that was a huge mistake, and I wish I hadn't agreed to that. And it was an example of not paying attention to a gut feeling, because my guts were telling me, but I still did it. The pain of losing the attachment, or the pain of giving up authenticity.
Pain of losing yourself, in a way.
Pain of losing yourself. And very often, losing yourself ends up manifesting in autoimmune disease, in malignancy, or depression. I mean, if you look at even a simple word like depression, again, this is this big medical mystery, the genetic disease. This is just nonsense. You know, what does it mean to depress something?
To push it down.
Yeah. What gets pushed down in depression? Our emotions. Why do people push? No infant is born pushing down their emotions. So if somebody develops the habit of pushing down their emotions, it's because they had to in order to be accepted. And then later on, you got this disease, so that the consequences of surrendering your authenticity, which then is reinforced in school. You have to be a good student, and you have to fit in, you have to comply, and you get rewarded for doing so, punished for not doing so. On the job, again, you have to, and especially in women, there's all kinds of expectations of how they should behave, what they should look, what their demeanor should be,
Be good.
Yeah.
But bringing it back a sec, what happened in the container of your marriage and relationship? Because you guys have been married for how many years?
It's coming up 55.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So you must have gone through so many different seasons.
I've been married 8 times.
Yeah, exactly. So how did that play out, if you don't mind me asking, when you kind of were faced with, your own trauma and your own triggers?
Well, you can pull a Rupert Murdoch, or so that marry a new woman every few years. I read this morning he's going to get married again. He's 92, and his young lover is 67. They must be so in love, and or you can actually grow up. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, look, I had a wife I have a wife who blessedly refused to suppress herself.
I actually listened to an interview she did, which I think was the only one she's done with Harvest series, and it was so interesting to sort of hear from her perspective. She sounds incredible. Yeah,
well, she demanded that I grow up, and and I had a decision to make: do I grow up or do I get kicked out of the house?
So she was the one that kind of drove that.
One thing we've always shared, we really have honestly shared this, is that we're interested in the truth. That the truth is more important to us than any other consideration, just for its own sake. That drives my work. It drives
truth-seeking,
truth-seeking, so that's, I can give myself credit for that. But within the marriage, it was very often her refusal to just succumb to my childish expectations that would cause me to have a strong look at myself and say, well, what am I doing here? What's my real intention? So it was a dynamic, but it was really driven to a significant degree by her refusal to just accept the given role.
Because through the work that you've done, you've acquired so much wisdom and knowledge professionally. But
I like to think so.
But what are some of the wisdom and knowledge that you've gained from the container of being in a relationship for that long? What has it taught you about yourself and your own, how do you get triggered with each other? how do you work through that?
Well, see, triggered is an interesting word. I did used to be an English teacher, and so I pay a lot of attention to language. And when you think of a trigger, how big a part of the mechanism of the weapon is the trigger?
Tiny.
So for the trigger to work, there has to be an explosive charge there.
A historical one, often.
Yeah, that you've been carrying. I mean, if I don't carry an explosive charge, you can say whatever you want. I'm not going to get triggered.
So it's less about the person, it's more about...
It's not about the external trigger, it's about what's inside me. So when you get triggered, that's a good time to learn something.
About yourself.
Yeah, no, you might say something I don't like, but I don't want to get triggered. I'll just say, okay, I don't like what you just said. I don't want to be talked to that way, or but that's not being triggered. That's just being triggered is a reactivity. I can be responsive, which is I'll just tell you exactly what I think. But being triggered means there's a big charge goes off inside you. Your body gets tense. Your whole physiology changes, and your brain gets into a state of reactivity and hostility or fear. No trigger can do that unless you're carrying the explosive charge. So what we've learned, and continue to learn, is that being triggered means that there's something for you to work out within yourself.
And we get most triggered with the people that we're closest to. Oh,
absolutely. I mean, there's a book decades ago, called Intimate Enemies, which is about marriage. And nobody's more calculated to trigger you than the people to whom you're looking for love and support and on whom you rely, because it brings back all the stuff that's not resolved from childhood.
So do you see a relationship as a container for your own spiritual work?
Oh, I've often said, look, I've done meditation retreats, and I've done psychedelic work, and I've listened to all kinds of spiritual teachers, and I've read all manner of spiritual books, and I've learned a lot. But I've always say that the most important spiritual developmental arena for me has been my marriage.
And you said a second ago about, your wife, Ray, joked about that you should write a book when the wife says no.
Yeah.
How you are so in demand, probably more than ever at the moment.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? I hate to use the term, but the sort of work-life balance of the boundaries of how much you give of yourself and how much you kind of keep.
Well, again, language is very interesting, because you said the work-life balance. Now, what's the assumption there? That there's life here and there's work here. And that's already an interesting assumption. In this society, everybody talks about work-life balance. It's like work is just something we do, but it's not really our lives. Well, it's about integration, isn't it? It's about not dividing yourself. So there used to be a time when, first of all, out of a kind of insecurity, I would not say no to any invitation or expectation, because I just want to, oh my God, somebody wants to listen to me, oh my God, I mean, I've always had kind of a double relationship to my work. Like, on one hand, I always knew that what I was saying was important and not always accurate, but by and large true, you know, and so that I just expected the world to listen, because
it's true.
That's how I saw it. But at the same time, there was always a part of me that was just sort of this little ego trying to prove itself, that I'm important and it matters, and please listen to me, So and so that part often drove my behavior. Quite apart from the validity of what I was saying, there was this part that just wanted validation, which is just an imprint of trauma. Well, that part is, as long as that part was in charge, I wouldn't know how to say no. It used to be ridiculous, Now it's, I appreciate the invitation, I appreciate the listening I get, but I'm not going to sacrifice my inner peace or my relationship for the sake of yet one more platform on which to speak my truth, And anyway, the work is out there now. If I should hop the twig tomorrow, as they say, the work will still continue without me.
And how do you it's a tricky thing when someone becomes very famous or reaches a lot of success to kind of manage the ego, because it can quite easily.
You know what? The older I get, the less seriously I take my ego. I mean, I just see it for what it is.
And what do you see it as?
Well, the ego itself is a little demand to be noticed and to be valued. And why? Because we weren't as infants. So it's a compensation. So I can see it for the little, I mean, the bigger ego, the bigger it seems in the world, the smaller the person really is inside.
Oh.
So I look at these politicians, like these humongous egos. They're such little people, so scared, so desperate, so dependent.
So traumatized.
Traumatized, yeah. Well, look, the British upper class is John le Carré, the great spy writer,
Mm-hmm.
He was in conversation with another British writer. I think his name was Brian Macaulay, but I forget the name. Anyway, the two of them were in conversation. And one of them, and this was in the New York Review of Books, and one of them said to the other one that a British upperclassman could have a fifth grade nervous breakdown studying right next to you, and you wouldn't know it.
You wouldn't.
You wouldn't know it. And when you actually look at these stiff-lipped heroes that went out and massacred the world. If you go to I was in Westminster Abbey last fall, and I took a long, slow tour. There's all these monuments to mass murderers. People that went to India and killed a lot of people. People that went to Africa or Afghanistan and killed a lot of people. What for? For the sake of domination and for the sake of control and for all the wealth that Britain sucked in from the world. This is how the royal family made its money, as Harry kind of intimated in his autobiography. Well, who would do such things? They were sent to these public schools, so-called public schools, where they were just miserably treated and bullied and abused.
And suppressing everything they felt.
Suppressing with a stiff upper lip. So they could do all that stuff out there. Mm-hmm. And these are the leaders.
Because I was going to say, do you ever kind of feel that you lose your authenticity as being someone that's very in demand, kind of wearing multiple hats, being pulled in every direction? How do you maintain your center of your authentic self? And it sounds like it's still quite challenging sometimes.
Well, look, that's constant work. But, if it's a question of being intentional in my life. What am I actually intending? Mm-hmm. Not just, being pulled and pushed in every direction. What am I valuing? If I do my yoga and meditation, for example, I'm in much better shape than when I don't.
And you're swimming.
Well, swimming is absolutely essential, yeah. Yeah, so there's got to be self-care. And I have to really, I don't accept invitations now or speaking to or requests without discussing with my wife. I just don't sneak it in under the door. And guess what, dear? I'm going to Australia next week,
And how has she managed this sort of explosion that's happened over the last 5 years or 10 years?
She's pleased for the success of the work. She's not in the least impressed. It doesn't change her view of me and she, by the way, she always said to me quite some time ago when I used to be anxious about, why doesn't the world beat a path to my door? And she said, listen, Gabor, just do the work and let the work do its own work in the world. And that's what happened. So they eventually got noticed. So here it is. But she's not impressed by it, and she doesn't want to feed it in any way at all. And if it doesn't fit into our lives, she wants nothing to do with it.
Mm. The next thing I wanted to ask you about, and you touched on it a second ago, I know that you had quite a transformational experience with psychedelics.
Yeah.
Would you be able to share your thoughts on plant medicine and that particular journey for you?
Yeah. Well, the one journey that you're probably referring to is the one that's written up in my book, The Myth of Normal. So that was one experience, and I can talk about it if you like. But I've been working with psychedelics now for 15 years now. I mean, in the 60s, as a student, I did dabble with LSD and all this, but...
I think actually Ray said in the interview that on your first date, you showed up on acid.
Yeah, the first time I dated my wife. But actually what had happened to me is there was a woman I was deeply in love with, but the only time we could communicate and relax with each other is when I was stoned on acid. And then it was like heaven on earth. But when I wasn't stoned, we had nothing to say to each other. So I dated her for 6 months or more, and when I met I still was when I met my wife, and I actually believed that I couldn't be any fun without acid, that I wouldn't be acceptable, interesting enough to a woman. So the first time I dated Ray, my wife, I took acid,
But she said you were very funny on it.
Yeah, she thought I was the funniest, most fun guy in the world, We had a good time. I didn't tell her for years later. But anyway, my psychedelic use in the 60s was strictly for recreation or fun purposes. I had no spiritual intention behind it or transformational intention. And after my book on addiction came out in 2009, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, based on my work with this addicted population and based on my own addictive history, people kept asking me, what do you know about ayahuasca, which is Peruvian or Brazilian or Amazonian plant, and the treatment of addiction? And I said, I know nothing. But people kept asking me. So I finally thought maybe I should find out. So then I began interested seriously in psychedelic work, and I found that the psychedelic plants especially can be powerful agents of transformation and healing. There was an article yesterday in the New York Times about a plant called iboga, which grows in Gabon and has been used there by the tribes there for spiritual purposes for hundreds of years. But iboga has got the capacity, in the right setting, and this is really important to stress, in the right hands, you could be an opiate addict and do one session with iboga and not have withdrawal symptoms from the opiates. I mean, it's unbelievable. I've seen it. I've worked with it. It's been studied. Article in the New York Times about it, about the studies now around it, and it's still illegal in Britain and Canada and the US.
Why is that?
Because people are stupid. That's why.
Is it just stupidity, or is it more intentional?
The politicians are opportunistic babies, and they will not stick their necks out. So that, there's this whole anti-drug prejudice. So they're not going to extend themselves to find out, despite all the evidence.
But is it also...
I'm telling you, a lot of the heroin addicts in this country could be healed with the proper use of iboga. Now, it's not 100%. It's only 50 or 60%, which is like 10 times better than anything else that we have. And it's not without risks, but again, in the right hands, those risks can be mitigated and minimized.
How long have you worked with Sibyl?
Ya va a ser como 38 años de empezar a joder con esta cosa. Van aprendiendo de que cura todo, muchachos.
Who taught you how to heal with plants?
No, ese no he curado con la planta. La gente sí. Y ya te molí nada más para cuando trabaja, ya empezamos. No ocupan. Esto. Esto ya. Y esto son enteritos ya.
Oh, wow.
Esto.
That's bonito.
Y esto para llamarlo. Al final. Es para trabajar ya. Un día te faja para sacarlo, cosa malo que tiene uno, enfermedad. Esto.
You know, they found ropes like that with Sibyl seeds that are thousands of years old.
Sí. Ese ya para que yo me hiciera. Sí.
Will you teach me about how you use Sibyl?
Sí, claro. Porque la cosa no es para agarrar así nomás. Si no te acaba uno que enseña. ¿Qué no? Usted, de primero esto, parece que no es nada, como que estamos jugando, mejor dicho, pero no, estamos haciendo la cosa, bien hecho. Porque para ir no ya no está, ahí aquí me está. ¿A vos me acompaña?
Sí.
Bueno, ya está ahí. Yo tenía que enseñar cómo hay cosas. Ay. Ay. Ahí está. Muchas veces yo quiero, no es para ponerse más, sino yo confiar para que usted mira esfuerzo, para que me enseñe, para que lo hace ver las cosas, como es. Apetama porque tenemos, una apetino ya se lo pegamos. No se anda tampoco, un mol. Ya está. Amargo, ¿no? Amargo. No te voy a notar, está todo. Un día que usted quiere trabajar, con esa mano se sacan las cosas. ¿Vos sentís mal?
I feel good. Bueno. That's bien. I feel good, and I think that if you feel that it's appropriate, that I could take more.
Ya. Claro. Bueno, cosa despacito vamos. Ese va a ser como para que tenga ciencia. Voy lo que él tenga que botar.
How should I blow my nose?
Claro, sacar porque ya está. Yo el espíritu tuyo ya te entregó ya. Ahora tengo que sacar.
How do you recommend I blow my nose? Into a tissue?
Ahora nomás ya tengo que sacarlo. Sacarlo. Ya te lo escupado.
Too late for that, I already swallowed.
El espíritu tuyo aquí está. Ahí está. Yo no veía ya. Lo que sabía hasta el palo que sabíamos llegar para subir eso.
When Dr. Gabor Maté talks about psychedelics like ayahuasca and iboga, he's not just sharing a clinical observation. He's opening a window into a world of healing that many of us might feel drawn to, yet hesitant to explore. For those who've ever felt trapped by pain, whether it's the ache of addiction, the weight of unresolved trauma, or simply a heart that's grown heavy over time, his words hit home. Psychedelics, he says, can be a bridge back to ourselves, a way to face what we've buried and rediscover the love and possibility within us. And that's not just poetic, it's backed by a growing body of evidence. Take iboga, for instance. Research, like the studies highlighted in that New York Times article he mentions, shows it can interrupt opiate withdrawal in ways modern medicine still struggles to match. In places like Gabon, where it's been used for centuries in Bwiti ceremonies, it's not seen as a drug, but as a sacred tool for spiritual awakening, a stark contrast to the West's methadone swaps or endless detox cycles. One 2018 study from the Journal of Psychedelic Studies found that a single iboga session reduced withdrawal symptoms in over 50% of participants, offering a glimpse of freedom from addiction's grip that feels almost miraculous. Yet, as Gabor points out, it's still illegal here, locked away by stigma and fear, leaving so many without access to something that could change their lives. Then there's ayahuasca, which he describes with such raw honesty. Tears streaming down his face, not from sadness, but from a love so pure it cracked his heart open. If you've ever felt like your emotions are locked behind a wall, maybe built in childhood, maybe reinforced by a world that tells us to toughen up, this might resonate deeply. Science supports this too. Studies from institutions like Imperial College London have shown psychedelics can reboot neural pathways, helping us process trauma in ways talk therapy alone sometimes can't. A 2021 trial found ayahuasca increased emotional regulation and self-compassion in participants, offering a safe space to confront pain with support, not isolation. But Gabor's caution about vulnerability hits just as hard, doesn't it? For anyone who's ever sought help, whether from a therapist, a spiritual guide, or even a friend, there's that tender moment where you're wide open, trusting someone to hold your story. His warning about exploitation isn't just a footnote, it's a lifeline. In the psychedelic community, cases of abuse have surfaced, shamanic retreats gone wrong, leaders taking advantage of that openness. A 2020 report from Chacruna Institute documented instances of sexual misconduct in ayahuasca circles, echoing his point. Power imbalances can turn healing into harm. It's a reminder that if you're drawn to this path, you're not naive for wanting safeguards, you're wise. So, what does this mean for us? If you're watching this and wondering if psychedelics could help you, or someone you love, Gabor's empathy shines through. He's not preaching from a pedestal. He's been there, crying under ayahuasca's gaze, facing his own closed-off heart. He's telling us it's okay to seek something bigger, to want relief from the pain we've carried too long. But he's also saying, trust yourself. That gut feeling he keeps circling back to? It's your compass. Whether it's choosing a guide, a setting, or even deciding if this is your path at all, you've got an inner wisdom that's been with you since day one. And maybe, just maybe, psychedelics could help you hear it again, safely, supported, and with the love you deserve.
As a psychedelic evangelist, but I'm just saying that there are certain uses that we're actually insane to ignore. Mm-hmm. Imagine if you could put somebody, like we don't have any treatments for opiate addiction in the Western world. We give people methadone or Suboxone, but those aren't treatments. They're just substituting one opiate for another. Mm-hmm. And with iboga, you could actually get people off their opiates within a couple of days.
What would a world look like where that is, given the right setting and intention and integration for people struggling with addiction? In your mind,
what would it look like?
Yeah. Like, what could it look like?
Well, I mean, I've done it,
hopefully?
and I've led retreats with the plant ayahuasca, for example, and which, by the way, doesn't treat addiction like the way iboga does. Iboga is unique that way. Ayahuasca can help, but the difference between ayahuasca and ibogaine is that ibogaine actually stops the withdrawal symptoms.
Wow.
So that the cold turkey, I don't know if you remember that song by John Lennon called "Cold Turkey's Got You on the Run." I mean, it's hell to withdraw from heroin. Iboga obviates that. It stops the withdrawal. No, ayahuasca doesn't do that. Ayahuasca can give you deep insights into yourself. It can actually help you experience, but in a safe setting with support, the traumatic imprints from which your addiction was an attempt to escape, because all addictions are an attempt to escape pain. That's all they are. Again, this whole idea of addictions being this disease that you inherit is, from a scientific point of view, nonsense. When you ask people what any addiction will do for them, whether it's drugs or gambling or pornography or shopping or eating or whatever it is, it soothes my emotional pain. So the real issue, as I say, is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And you don't understand people's pain. You got to look at their lives and what happened to them. So the psychedelic plants can actually help you, put you in touch with what happened to you.
And you have to face that pain.
You have to face it, but you have to face it with support so that you're not overwhelmed by it. The problem is that the first time you experienced those pains, you were helpless and isolated and without support. That's why the pain never got resolved. And that's why you had to escape into addiction. Well, what if you could face that pain in an atmosphere of support and acceptance and integration, where you're not alone, where you actually, with your adult mind, can understand what happened? What if you got in touch with deep parts of yourself that were maybe suppressed? Like the first time I did ayahuasca, 15 years ago now, I just started crying. Tears came down my face. And it was pure love. And it wasn't love like just for any one person. It wasn't that. It was just my heart opening. And I realized, owing to what happened to me as an infant, how much I closed my heart. Just in the closing of the heart. Hard-hearted people are just very hurt people who harden themselves in order not to feel the pain. So the ayahuasca just opened me right up, you know. So you could get in touch with both the painful dynamics that you've been suppressing, running away from, compensating for, whether through addiction or by people pleasing or by whatever, but also it puts you in touch with the deep love and possibilities that dwell in your soul, you know. So psychedelics in the right environment can do that. Now, they can also be exploited. I've seen people being exploited on psychedelics. I think
they are being I am a huge advocate for them, but then I do worry about the lack of integration around them. If people haven't done any of the work, then they're going in for this like hero's dose and then being spat out. I don't know whether that's very helpful.
Well, it can be,
and it can sort of set off something else.
It can be very discomforting and discombobulating, and I've seen people hurt by it, and just that lack of preparation and integration afterwards. But I've also seen people literally exploited. I've seen people sexually exploited. Psychedelics can make you very vulnerable. You're very open, and
you've seen people sexually exploited from it.
Oh yeah, I've seen that in the ayahuasca world.
Really?
I've seen it in the MDMA world.
What do you mean by that?
Well, look, anytime you get vulnerable people on one end and powerful leaders on the other, if in the powerful leader there's any kind of exploitative tendency, they have a field day. And you can see it in the church, can't you? With priests exploiting vulnerable.
I guess it happens in a lot of, things that become cults.
But even without a cult, it can happen in psychiatry. It can happen in medicine, doctors who exploit their patients. It can happen in the spiritual world. I can name you any number of Buddhist great teachers who sexually exploited their followers.
What do you think's happening there in terms of, because I'm always curious, because there's so many stories of this, about having, someone that might start off with a good intention and have something really beautiful to share with the world.
Yeah.
And then something happens, like the ego, the sort of messiah complex takes over, and then it becomes sort of dark and depraved. What's your observation of that pattern?
Well, that's just what's so interesting, isn't it? What you just said. Because the teachings that they can transmit are so beautiful and transformative and powerful and real. But they're not integrated. They haven't done the emotional work. They develop spiritually, but not emotionally. And emotionally inside them is still a hungry, acquisitive little ego, which then given the power, and then given the vulnerability of the people that come to them. Look, I've seen it. I mean, when you're working like I do, you meet a lot of people. And there's always possibility for exploitation. Were I minded that way, because people are vulnerable, they open themselves, and I idolize you.
Yeah.
And I do everything I can not to be idolized. I mean, I'm sort of the most...
how do you...
In a certain way, I'm just a totally ridiculous little being like everybody else is. But
is that a constant thing that you have to kind of remind yourself of when you are being...
I'm not tempted, but I can see where I could have been, or where I was, but I dealt with it. But these people, if they haven't done the emotional work, then they've got this terrific spiritual burgeoning of spiritual wisdom and power, but then you get these vulnerable people, and the ego in them just wants to exploit that. And the ego will even tell them it's for their benefit. Sleep with me, and you'll be closer to God, this kind of stuff, So I've seen that in the Buddhist world, in the Hindu world, in the Christian world, in the Jewish world. So naturally it happens in the psychedelic world as well. It's not it's not particularly egregious in the psychedelic world. It's just similar to what you see in other disciplines.
It's a very similar sort of format, and I guess in a way it's intensified because of that period of time where someone is totally vulnerable, but is having, I guess, a spiritual experience.
That's right.
And what are some of, what's your...
No, by the way, none of which is to denigrate the value of psychedelics, which I totally support.
No, of course.
I'm just telling people.
I've loved this conversation,
Thank
by
you.
the way, but what is your hope for the work that you've done in terms of how it will impact people?
I participated in a workshop in Los Angeles maybe 7-8 years ago now. So, and it was about what is your calling? And you would have thought by then, when I was 72 or 73, I would know what my calling is, but it needed some clarifying. And what I came through with after 2 days is that my calling is that people are free. And the calling, by calling, what they meant was, what's the imprint you'd like to have left in the world when you're no longer here? What is the legacy or the effect, so that if you hadn't been here, there would be less of it somehow. And what came up to me is that my calling is that people are free. Freedom. And all my work is about that. So freedom to me, I grew up in Hungary under the communist dictatorship. In 1956, there was a revolution and there was a freedom fight. I saw that. I was inspired by it. I'm inspired by freedom. I'm also inspired by freedom in a personal sense, and that much of the dynamics that you and I have been speaking about have been about how our unconscious patterns, our imprinted traumas keep us limited, keep us self-suppressed.
Shackled, yeah.
Shackled, that's right. And so I want people to be free of their own unconscious. I want them to be free of these dynamics that keep them limited and separated and disconnected from their authentic selves, that keep them in relationships that don't serve them, that keep them in roles that don't represent who they are. I just want people to be free. And so that's what my intention is. That's what I would like for the world. I just want people to be free.
I think you're doing a wonderful job of it.
Thank you.
So, did Gabor really regret his interview with Harry? Maybe the Real story isn't just about a paywall or a prince. It's about that quiet voice inside him, the gut feeling he didn't heed. We've all been there, haven't we? Ignoring that inner nudge, only to look back and wish we'd listened. But here's the beauty in Gabor's journey. It's never too late to tune in. From the tears of ayahuasca to the lessons of a 55-year marriage, he's shown us that our pain, our triggers, even our regrets, they're not endpoints, but invitations. Invitations to peel back the layers, to trust ourselves, to break free from what holds us down. Imagine a world where we all dared to follow that instinct, to choose authenticity over fear, to heal not just for ourselves, but for each other. That's Gabor's dream, freedom, unshackled and true. So, as you step away from this screen, ask yourself, what's your gut telling you right now? Maybe it's time to listen. Because if Gabor's taught us anything, it's that the path to who we really are starts with one brave, quiet yes to ourselves. Thanks for watching. Keep seeking, keep feeling, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Inside Serene, a channel dedicated to helping you navigate your healing journey. Together, we can break free from the chains of addiction, trauma, and chronic stress and embrace a brighter future.